I'd like to welcome everybody out to the Central Region RAC. Today is May 13th and the time is 6 o'clock. Been asked to read this. We'd like to call this meeting to order. And I'm supposed to read this statement, so here we go. Welcome to the Central Region Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the Central Region office in Springville, as well as streamed live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions and ideas on wildlife management in our state. The RAC considers your feedback on proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is in charge of setting wildlife policy in our state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes is emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. It is why we're here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion today at today's meeting to fill out a comment card, and those are located on the table in the foyer. We expect those in attendance to respect the people who speak, especially those who hold views that don't align with our own. Respectful behavior helps facilitate efficient meetings where RAC members can listen, digest, and address the concerns, ideas, and proposals being presented for consideration. Disrespectful behavior including booing, yelling, cheering, or laughing while someone is speaking. We can also help maintain a respectful space by referring to people by name instead of their descriptors or their physical appearances, demeanor, or gender. If this behavior occurs, the RAC chair will remind attendees to be respectful. If the behavior continues, the applicable individual or individuals will be asked to leave. Lastly, please help us reduce distractions by putting our phones on silent. And if you need to take a call, we ask that you step out in the foyer. Okay, I'd like to start by introducing our RAC members. And today we'll start over with Eric.
Eric Reed, Bureau of Land Management.
Kellen Heyer, Agriculture.
Drew Eline, Forest Service.
Braden Shepherd, Ag.
Mike Christensen at large.
Jim Schuler, Animal Watcher.
First time I got to say it, right?
Joshua Leonard, Outgoing Sportsman's Rep.
And Scott Jensen at large.
Okay. Thank you to the members of the RAC. I would also like to acknowledge Gary Nielsen here from the Wildlife Board. And I see Paula Richmond is on also from the Wildlife Board. And it looks like, Jim, are you there? Yeah, thank you. Or John, sorry. Yeah, John, are you there?
Yeah, everybody. Like Jim, I am a wildlife watcher and a pleasure to join this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And we also have Kent Johnson from the Wildlife Board watching online. Okay. Okay, we'd like to welcome Brian Christensen as the dedicated hunter program coordinator, Kobe Jones, wildlife section chief, and Chad Bettridge from the Division of Wildlife Resources. Chad Wilson, once again, will give us another fine presentation. And Chelsea Duke and Heather Talley will also present from the division. So, welcome any public that's also watching on YouTube. And we'll just start off by, let me pull up the agenda. I always wish that they would do the regional update in between the Wildlife Board so I didn't have to keep reading. But we're going to do a Wildlife Board update from the last Wildlife Board meeting. And it was a very busy meeting. The Wildlife Board did make a motion to ask the division to look into the use of aerial equipment for hunting and retrieval of game. And they place that on the action log item as an action log item. And I think that's important for the public to be aware that that's on the radar coming up. So get involved and comment on that when it comes appropriate. The Wildlife Board made the motion to pass unanimous to approve the recommendations for taking big game. Also passed unanimous that they approved deer permit numbers as presented with the Beaver West reduction as presented by the division. unanimously passed that the division look at procedures of how to contact or notify hunters when a hunt is available due to a lone sheep disease outbreak. And then they passed the once in a lifetime permit recommendations unanimously. They passed the bull elk permit recommendations unanimously. They passed the antelope permit recommendations unanimously. They passed the antlerless permits unanimously. They passed unanimous the CWMU antlerless permit with one recusal, and they passed the landowner permits rule unanimously. And they passed the criteria for the HB 202 tags to somehow evaluate that there is a public benefit being offered. That was unanimous. And they unanimously passed the Expo rule amendments, and they unanimously passed the CWMU buck and bull recommendations that were given as a amendment. So that's about as much unanimous consent as you'll see at a wildlife board. It was very good board meeting. You can go back and watch it online. And we'd like to turn the, sorry. Need to approve the agenda in the minutes. You can stop me anytime. Just punch me. So do I have a motion to do that? To approve the agenda in the minutes?
I'll move to approve the agenda in the minutes.
Second.
Motion made by Scott, second by Eric. All in favor? And okay, thank you, John. Okay, I'd like to move on to the DWR update, and that's Jason Robinson will be giving that.
Well, thank you for having me. Jason Robinson filling in for Jason Vernon. He took a new position out of our Salt Lake office, so I'll be filling his seat here for tonight, giving a regional update. So within the wildlife section, we recently completed our 2025 sage grouse select counts, and counts were slightly up this year from last year. Elk calf, moose calf, and deer fawn seasons are upon us. Let us know if you would like to get out and join on some of those searches with us. And then the wildlife section banded 49 black rosy finches and 135 gray-crowned rosy finches at Alta. We had 33 recaptures, and some of those dated back to as far back as 2018, which makes them at least 7 years old, which is pretty incredible. All the rosy finches banded this year received colored bands for possible resighting during the summer breeding season. Within the aquatic section, we've got some spring sampling going on. Sampling going on at Strawberry Reservoir with nets for trout and walleye detection. No walleyes have been discovered as of yet. Utah Lake trammel nets and spawning June suckers. Then there's some Mill Creek invasive brook trout removal going on as well. And then e-shocking of the old Provo River channel. That's going on as well. We have some spring fishing updates. Utah Lake channel catfish is picking up. White bass seem to be active, but the adults seem to still be a little bit scattered. 9 Mile Reservoir, lots of rainbows in the 2 to 5 pound range. And then Jordanelle and Deer Creek, fishing's going well there as well. Outreach partnerships, the Utah Lake field trip did with the outreach team and Utah Lake Authority. And then the Salem Pond Kids Fishing Day happened today, and we'll hear a little bit more about that. The next section, the habitat section, rolling into their busy season. Completed a mastication project of more than 1,000 acres of juniper and oak brush on the 12-mile WMA. Helped forestry fire and state lands with a prescribed fire on the Sand Pitch Mountains to benefit mule deer habitat. They built a new guzzler here out in the West Desert, and then planted 8,000 shrub seedlings at the Santaquin WMA. Within the outreach section, a lot of new members to the outreach section. We've got Michael Packer as the outreach manager. Nicole Passari will be the wildlife recreations program specialist. And then Tristan Doyle will be the volunteer service coordinator. So a whole new team there. Staying busy with DWR events, seminars, clinics, and partner events. Youth fishing programs are in full swing. Volunteer instructors are still needed. You can get dedicated hunter hours through those. Successful Kids Fishing Day event at Salem Pond today. Been a long day for some of our outreach folks, and want to thank them for all their work that they've done. That event had over 1,800 participants today. The Utah Lake Festival is scheduled for Saturday, May 31st. It's a free event that takes place at Utah Lake State Park. Family friendly, and it's from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then within the law enforcement section, several officers in the region participated in the Provo airport crash scenario training on Utah Lake that involved officers from many departments. Officer Braley was helping a family that had a squirrel in their house. The squirrel didn't appreciate that and decided to bite Officer Braley. Luckily, his tetanus shot was current, so lucky there. Several officers attended the Provo Police Department's Cops and Bobbers event at Vivian Park. Many children at the event caught their very first fish, which was fantastic. And then the other thing we would like to do is we've actually got 2 RAC members that are leaving us. This will be their last meeting, Mike Christensen and Joshua Leonard. We wanted to say thank you. You guys have always been engaged in the conversations here on the RAC. You've added great items to the conversations and spoken your minds when you needed to. And so we appreciate it, and just wanted to say thank you for your time here on the RAC. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Some of us have spoken our mind more than others, and maybe more than we should have. Okay, that being said, we'd like to move on to agenda item number 5, Brian Christensen with the dedicated hunter amendments. And if you have anything you'd like to add or clarify from your presentation.
Very short. I'll take any questions you have for me, though.
Okay, does the RAC have any questions for Brian? Dedicated hunter. Could you just give us like a couple minutes, or a minute or so of just so we can have it on YouTube in the minutes?
What do that? I think it was like 2 minutes and 39 seconds. So if I sum it up, it'll be
45 seconds.
Yeah. So the basics of what we're proposing here is that dedicated hunters on occasion have requested just a little more time to be able to do their first year service. And this recommendation opens up the opportunity. So if I'm going to use an example of me, I'm going to apply in the drawing application, and I want to do some service. Maybe there's a project that is in January or February, and I go do that project. If I happen to draw this year, we'll go back, the division will go back and look from January 1st up until the draw results date. And if I did some approved service through the division's website, then we'll apply that to the new 3-year term. The main distinction I want to make, though, is that these won't accumulate from year to year. This is just an opportunity to expand that window from 3 months to basically like 6 months for those that want to take advantage of that. So that's the nutshell.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay. Seeing none, turn it over to Jason for the online feedback.
So the question was, which best describes your position regarding the proposed changes to the dedicated hunter program? We had one person strongly agree. That was the only vote we had there. So weighted average of 5, and there were no comments.
All right. Thank you. Well, we have no comment cards. Does anybody have a comment they'd like to make? Okay, seeing none, we'll close comments and bring it back to the RAC for discussion. Seemed like a pretty straightforward topic and an idea that's been kind of pushed for a few years, feels like, so.
Are we ready for motion? I'll make a motion.
Sure.
That was an easy one. I move that we approve the dedicated hunter rule amendment allowing hunters to bank hours.
I'll second.
So we have a motion to approve as presented. And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimous. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Okay, move on to agenda item number 6, Conservation Permit Program Rule Amendments by Kobe Jones. And while Kobe comes up, we could ask Lindy when we're gonna have the draw results. You do?
Oh, yeah, I know
Okay.
the answer to this.
Hey, I'm right here.
I don't want to steal Lindy's thunder.
Hey, she wants to have some positive
Yeah,
to say.
go for it, Lindy.
Yeah, they actually got released at 5 p.m. tonight. So, but it does take around 24 hours to get them all sent out. But you can just go onto our website and look at your profile and look at your application history and see your results.
Okay,
Good luck, everyone.
thanks, Lindy.
Yep.
So yeah, if you look in your application history, it'll show up. And based on the way that I felt after I looked at my application history, I told Lindy that I thought they were wrong.
I'll second that, Covey. Second.
They're back on now. Yeah, they're on. So you're good. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, do you want to have anything to add?
I don't think so. This is a pretty simple change, I guess. I put up my presentation, but there's two big things here. One is that there was a strong sentiment that we had extended unit bighorn sheep tags to the 31st for years. There's a strong sentiment that if we're going to do that, that we should extend the public hunter. And there are several reasons why we did that for a year. It's not a great idea. And a lot of that is because our survey work takes place in November. And there's a lot of frustration that comes along with that. And so last round of RACs, they said, well, if you're going to move it back for everyone. And so we're recommending to move that extension back for everyone. And then the rest of the changes allow us to have a MOU with Antelope Island that is more beneficial to the public.
Thank you. Who came up with that MOU idea?
So we were directed to have an MOU in code.
Yeah. I guess let me be more specific of the idea of like balancing it or moving it towards the public's
Yeah.
kind of side.
So I think the agency been thinking about it for a long time. Because we wanted to have more hunting on the island, but at the expense of having more it just didn't make sense. The way when hunting started out there, it wasn't super. There was a lot of opposition to it, but it's been a little bit normalized, and there are a lot of people out there that enjoy it and want it to continue. So I think the agency had been thinking about it for a long time, and I think also it's in the northern region. It started there of, hey, if we're going to have this, it should be more beneficial. And so as we've worked on that MOU, we've thought a lot about that. Things like management buck hunts, having additional deer or sheep tags. And the way the rule was written before, because of the sentiment at the time, was for every permit that's out there, there has to be it's called a special Antelope Island conservation permit. And we just said, no, that's not where we want to be. So yeah, a lot of the public, I guess, Mike, is that what you're looking for? The public said it, the agency thought it. I think everybody was kind of in agreement that it's time to revamp this and get some more benefit.
I think it's a well-rounded answer. Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions for Kobe?
Hey, just in memory of John Bear, are those Jabot jeans you're wearing today? No, just kidding. No.
Seriously.
Sorry. No. No, I think this is I think it'll be a good thing. When the MOU is finalized, does that go through the whole RAC and
It doesn't. It goes direct. So that's something that will go directly to the board in this cycle. And then after the board signs off on it, their role in the MOU is really just to approve us to issue those permits. So the MOU is between, and it's between the two agencies, and then the board's role is to say, yep, we like where this landed, go ahead and issue the permits.
Any other questions? Questions from the audience? Oh. John. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just to clarify, we're talking about one bighorn permit and one buck, mule deer buck. Is that right? On Antelope Island?
So currently that's how it is. The modern MOU will have more flexibility in it than that. Or the next MOU will have more flexibility in it than that.
What will determine the number of permits issued?
What's that?
What will determine the number of permits issued, for example, bighorn on Antelope Island?
So it would be the number of males on the island, the number of males in the category classification of males. I mean, I think, so John, just, I don't want to go into it too much, but one of the big problems we had on Antelope Island is when it got so ram heavy, they started to leave. And when they started to leave, it exponentially increased our disease potential. You know, still not sure if it's because a ram left or because domesticated livestock came onto the island. Probably a ram left and came back. And that whole population, I was out there when we had to remove the population, and the sheep were sick enough they couldn't stand up. It was horrific. And so running male to female ratios at that level, the goal of that is to have a clean, healthy nursery herd to be able to reestablish populations across the state. And it probably means we need to have additional male harvest on the island.
Is the low water level in Salt Lake causing a problem with animals leaving the island and then coming back?
Well, we build a fence on the side of the island that where there is that land bridge. So that should help. Or it has helped, I guess I would say. I don't know if anything's completely foolproof, but we built, it's miles and miles of fence that goes across that flat.
Got it. All right. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you, John. Any other questions? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, we'll go to Jason for the online feedback.
So the question asked was, which best describes your position regarding the proposed changes to the conservation and sportsman's permits rule? There was one vote that strongly agreed for a weighted average of 5 and no comments.
All right, thank you. So looks like we have one public comment card, John Bear from SFW.
I didn't know John was commenting on this one. Just
John Bear, SFW. Just wanted to support the recommendation that's presented and tell the division we appreciate being part of the conversation. These are good common sense updates that are, you know, the right thing to do. And one thing though, I would like to maybe recommend, instead of continually calling it the island, can we change the name to what it is and just call it the peninsula that's kind of surrounded by a swamp? I mean, it's not really an island, and I hate to see Kobe continually confused. So just a thought. Thanks. Nice jeans, Kobe.
There's a lot of comments that could be made there. We'll close public comment though at this time. Okay, bring back to the RAC. I think that these changes are really good changes, and I like how a lot of these changes came from public comment and involvement over time, and you know, taking this through the RACs, the season dates, you know, before, and I feel like it got vetted very well. So thank you. Any other comments or motions?
I'll make a motion that we accept the proposal as presented by the DWR.
I'll go ahead and second it.
Okay, we have a motion to accept as presented and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimous.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay, agenda item number 7, outfitter and guides spotter rule amendments. And that'll be given by Chad Bettridge. And just as a reminder, this comes from a legislative mandate for you to implement, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Go ahead and, do you have anything to add or?
A couple things that have come through the comments and a couple clarifications. In the initial presentation, I believe I said December 31st as far as a deadline date. Just want to make sure you all saw that that was changed to March 31st. And we moved that to after the hunts were completed. So there wasn't going to a need for a renewal, excuse me, in the middle of the hunts. Second update, I had a conversation with the Forest Service employee, Avery Cook, who used to work for the Division of Wildlife. And he had mentioned that in their application process for a special use permit on Forest Service grounds, they require a state COR number. We also require the same thing from the Forest Service. So there's a spot where we would kind of butt up against each other and not be able to continue the process. So under the application and renewal and approval section of the rule, it's going to be section number 2, section D, all necessary federal permits to operate on federal land. We're okay with striking that and just making sure that federal land permits are held. Does that make sense? So lastly, there's been a lot of comments online regarding workman's comp and insurance and stuff like that. Right below that in the application and requirements and approval, it talks about attestation that workers' compensation insurance and commercial liability insurance to cover employees and clients has been obtained. A bunch of the online comments were regarding some of the guides and spotters would be 1099 contractors and wouldn't necessarily fit into that. This was an effort to make sure that full-time employees are protected and just have the proper things in place. But we're also willing to, I mean, throughout the rule, it says, you know, follow state rules, federal rules, guidelines, stuff like that. And so if that doesn't necessarily, we're okay with that being removed as well. So, and those were the kind of updates that I had.
All right. Do we have any questions for Chad? Don't make me ask all the questions tonight. Did you receive, I think we all received a proposed edits from the Utah Guides and Outfitter Association or Utah Outfitter and Guide Association.
Yes.
Did you receive that?
Yes. We've had numerous conversations with him. But my Captain Hovengay's talked to him quite a few times. The circumstances that he wanted to present kind of fall within the code rather than the rule. And obviously we're dealing with two different processes. And so we talked to him and they're good comments and potential. It's just a different process.
Outside of your scope, you feel like?
Kind of, yes.
Along those lines so we have outfitters, guides, and spotters, and in state code now that's how that's defined. Is it possible I know that there are places in state code within the wildlife realm that they're there, but they aren't utilized. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to not utilize like the term spotter and just go with guides and outfitters, or is that
one thing
important delineation
in our conversations with many outfitters and guides and different things like that? There is a not necessarily split, but there are people that are somewhat opposed to the spotter term or spotter position, but there's others that are in favor of it because in their minds, the guide and the spotter are two different jobs. And that's kind of where we were sitting, that, okay, people are for and people are against, and we were just kind of let the process play itself out type of thing.
Okay, that makes sense. And then with the subcontractor, portion, is it a concern that if they work for more than one outfitter or more than,
Not according to us.
Okay.
It's, and that's written in the rule that we don't want to limit the number of outfitters that a guide or a spotter works for, as long as they are properly registered. They only have to pay the fee the one time, but they will need to register, or, we call it associate with the outfitters, however many there are.
Okay.
And there's been a couple of discussions that, if an outfitter needs to switch a guide in the middle of a hunt, is that doable or not? And it is very much doable. We're still obviously working on the process. We hired a guy to sort of start working on this. Today was his first day. So we've got some work to do, but we're confident that we can come up with a fairly simple plan to appease that issue.
All right, thank you.
Just a quick note on that too. I know for Forest Service, our permits, you're supposed to give a list of employees under those outfitters and guides. And if you actually need to make a change to that, you have to get prior approval from the Forest Service. So if, in the middle of those periods after you have your permit, they do need to at least contact their office that administered it, like a ranger district or SO and supervisor's office.
And I think our saying that, we must follow all state laws and wildlife federal would cover that circumstance.
Yes, I think so. And also just a comment, thanks for chatting with Avery about when we saw the catch-22.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
oh no.
That was a day we went, oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Drew. Any other questions?
I guess on the spotter, they're only a spotter if they're compensated, right? So if you're up there and you spot an animal and tell an outfitter about it, you're fine. It's once you're getting compensation at that point, you need to apply and get a spotter permit.
Yeah, according to the rule, if you're an outfitter can only have 2 people associated with a big game hunt or a bear hunt that are compensated. That's what the rule states. Outside of that is up to, if they're going to bring somebody in and compensate them, somebody's got to go home. And obviously with the once in a lifetime species, you get 1 additional person. So you're going to have 3 people on the mountain. So.
Yeah, I guess we don't have a lot of leeway here to change it anyway, right? For the statute, but it seems silly to me. I think there's ways around it. The attorney me goes, oh, there's all kinds of ways you could work a deal out later on.
And you're not incorrect. And some of that burden is on us
you guys,
to enforce the rule and the statute. So it's something that we will work on.
Was there just a concern there's too many employees helping guides out there? Is that what was the concern with that on the legislation?
A lot of people on the landscape.
Just more people?
Yeah, and is kind of the gist of it is, and a fairness across the board is what my interpretation of what the legislation purpose was.
Okay.
So an outfitter is licensed.
Correct.
Guide is licensed.
Correct.
But there's no spotter license.
There is.
There is a license to be a spotter.
There is, according to
Or
the statute.
permit.
It's a COR that they register with the Division of Wildlife. So they get a certificate.
Has to go with it, like,
There's not.
yeah, okay.
I have one other question. So, and that involves the extraction of the animal. So is the extraction of the animal still mandated through rule or code that it can only be a certain number of people?
We talked about this a lot, and I believe, I gotta find it, that our intent was to say the rules in place during the take of that animal. Once the animal is down, get as many people you can to get that animal off the mountain. So that's the intent of it. I think we wrote that in there. I have to find it again, but you put me on the spot and I can't read at the moment.
Yeah, I know that some of the comments that we received were concerned about getting the animal out and packing it out because they interpreted it and this is from the Utah Outfitter and Guide Association, I believe, they interpreted it that they couldn't have more people come in for the extraction.
And there's some different definitions. So in field requirements 1A, it talks about no more than 2 registered outfitters, guides, or spotters may be assigned to a client at any given time while hunting. And that hunting is defined as sort of what we would call taking the animal. So that's, and once the animal's down, that's turns into a different circumstance.
Okay. I like that answer. Any other questions? Questions from the audience? See none, we'll go to Jason.
Okay, the question asked, which best describes your position regarding the proposed outfitters, guides, and spotters rule? There was one person that somewhat agreed, one person that somewhat disagreed, 3 people that strongly disagreed, for a total of 5 votes with a weighted average of 1.8. Summary of the comments. There were multiple comments indicating the DWR is overreaching by attempting to regulate guides and outfitters' livelihoods, and the division lacks expertise. Also, that there are serious legal and operational flaws that conflict with federal and state regulations. They are impractical and bypass public input.
All right, thank you. Okay, I don't see any comment cards. Does anybody here would anybody like to make a comment? Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the RAC for discussion.
I'll just say that, yeah, I think if we make a motion, Forest Service would like to see just that amendment that we discussed written into that, which I can move if we have any other comments.
I would imagine that since you clarified it, that's part of your presentation now, correct?
I will clarify it with each of the RAC meetings I go to, and then we will discuss it at the board meeting as well, yes.
Okay, so if we passed it as presented, that would be part of what you presented.
So that'd be striking it. Would that include a clause though? So you'd be striking that, 2D, do you plan on adding a clause just to clarify that you must obtain all federal special use permits, et cetera?
We would change it to where it fits the ability to do both, right?
Okay.
Yes, that's the intent of that is, and I might have said strike, but we might want to just reword it to where it fits within the ability to fulfill both of the processes.
Okay, yeah, then I'm good with that's going to be presented at each one.
All right. I think it's important to note that I don't feel like this came from the division. This came from the legislature. So I don't feel like the division is overreaching here. I feel like if anybody has any other qualms, it's with the body outside of the Division of Wildlife Resources. So just want to make that distinction. We got a lot of the feedback was along those lines. So, and any other comments and Drew, I think it's fine if you do put that in your motion. I actually think it'd be good to call that out where it's not, in any kind of publication or anything. So when we're ready to do that, go ahead.
Well, then I'll make a motion to approve with the amendment that reword 2D in the application section to clarify that state permit doesn't grant permission to operate on federal lands, and you have to acquire a special use permit from the relevant land management agency.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to approve as presented with the changes to 2D to state that essentially that the applicants must comply with the federal land agency's requirements, to reword that section and get a permit. Perfect. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimous. Thank you, Chad. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 8. Our favorite Chad. No offense, Chad Bettridge.
usually grind these things to hollow. I don't know why I'm your favorite.
We moved you up earlier in the agenda, Chad.
You're the one we know the best. So do you have anything to add to what you presented?
Just a quick follow-up is, yeah, it's public lands and CWMUs too that have previously their renewals, so they've previously been approved, and then 2 additional ones that went through the CWMU advisory committee and got a favorable recommendation. So we're recommending those to go through.
Thank you. Any questions from the RAC for Chad?
So Chad, there was a couple variances within the presentation. And I wonder how, and this is a question I've been wanting to ask for months now, but with CWMUs, which include public land parcels, given the 10th Circuit Court's ruling on corner crossing, where does that put access if the public land falls within a CWMU? Is the public able to access it based on that ruling?
So I don't know that we have an official statement on that, but if we adopt that ruling, which I actually think we have to, then yeah, they could access it, anything corner to corner. And just as a reminder, when public land's in a CWMU, that's just for the hunting of those species. So for any other legal activity, you can access public land.
And then one other question, another variance, there was like a 2-to-1 transfer and the other was a 1-to-1. Can you talk about how each of those how those numbers were decided upon? So
are you talking Prohibition Springs?
Yeah,
were they?
I forget that. I'd have to look it up myself.
So Prohibition Springs had 2, for every acre that they public land that they included in the CWMU, they were offering 2 private lands and trade lands.
Right.
Is that's what you're talking about?
Yeah, and then there was another one, and they were offering a 1-to-1 trade.
Probably Ingham Peak.
Yeah, and I
that
wonder.
That one was the renewal.
So how does this get decided? Because it seems like 2-to-1, there's a clear benefit to the public, but a 1-to-1, if the one, land is poorer quality than the other, it doesn't seem like the public really benefits in that circumstance. And so I wondered, how was it decided the one case versus the other case?
Yeah, so a lot of it's just the circumstances. So I think in this case, Ingham Peak, all of their land and I can't say this definitively, but I think they probably offered their land that was not in the CWMU, and that's what it ended up being, because it was a little bit more than 1-to-1. It was 1,300 more acres of private land. The other Prohibition Springs, I think, just has a lot more land to deal with, so they're able to offer more too. Sometimes the nuts and bolts of that too is the quality of land. So just because it's more land doesn't necessarily mean it's better. There's just a lot of factors that go into it, and the ability of the CWMUs and the biologists being out there looking at it.
Do you mind if I interject a little bit? As part of the CWMU advisory committee, Prohibition Springs, that number came about by the landowner wanting to cooperate with the public and with the division. That was the landowner's choice to do that. And if you go back and watch that meeting where those minutes occurred, those landowners were very cooperative and willing to. It's just for antelope, that CWMU, but they're going to allow hunting of all species on their private land. So it was a great cooperation, an example of what the program can be. So.
Hey, Chad, on a couple questions on the Prohibition Springs one. In your presentation, you actually said that the DWR did not support the variance, and would you be willing to explain the reasons why?
Yeah, so going into it, I think this one's been being talked about between us and the owner of it for quite a while. And going into it, we've heard a lot of feedback about public land and CWMUs, and that there just isn't an appetite for it. And I think that was the main reason going into it. Was like, we'd heard the feedback and we're like, I don't know if we're comfortable doing this. I think original talks was more of a 1-to-1 ratio. And so, I mean, they obviously went above and beyond on a lot of things. And after the recommendation, we feel comfortable adopting that recommendation and support it now.
All right, and just one more that's going on, because I did go back and I watched the presentation on there to kind of understand what was going on. And I think their response was they did not want to post all of the trade lands. I mean, it was like going to be cumbersome on them. You know, it was one of the things that they talked about. But didn't in the rewriting of the rule require posting of trade lands in the new rule the way it's written?
Yeah, let me
remember
touch
that?
on that a little bit. We treaded on some pretty tricky water here. One of the other things that they do is for trade lands, it's only big game with the new rule as well. One of the ways to be able to do this and to accomplish both those things and to allow access to all species was that we'd actually put this in the walk-in access program. And then just stipulate that they can't get compensated for it being in walk-in access. So that way, it'll be on all of our walk-in access maps. Through the CWMU program, we will say that that is trade lands, that's the public benefit. And then it will be open to not just big game, but all species.
I appreciate that. And I think that that's important that everybody gets to hear that, not just, you know, going on to try to find that meeting on YouTube and track that down. So thank you.
Question? Yeah, go ahead. So just kind of follow up with what Josh was saying. They brought up some great questions. I was really interested to hear the answers. That's some answers. But without Mike being here, I don't know that I'd have really understood the benefit. And he's gone next RAC meeting. So could you, when you present, kind of summarize and help the RAC understand these benefits more specifically like that, like the extra species that were being hunted or that would really help me. You do a great presentation, but I didn't know that until we had this meeting right here. If you had that information, maybe pass it on to us during that presentation so that everybody hears that same thing, like Eric was saying, not just those that went back and looked at the actual meeting.
Yeah, we can go, it's always kind of tricky of how much information you give on these compared to, there was a meeting that it talked about that. The slide that I have up does talk about it being in walk-in access and available to all species. I did go into more depth just now about the reasoning. And yeah, I mean, it's for sure something that we can consider doing, but that's generally why, like, we try to make these concise with the appropriate amount of information and not overwhelm people. But yeah, I can for sure look at adding a little bit more additional explanation to them.
Great questions. Thank you. Any more questions from the RAC?
I happen to have a couple.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you bring up the maps of those so we can look at them?
I would have to log into the meeting, which I can try to do. Oh, I hadn't looked up yet. That's a little disturbing.
All right, so Prohibition Springs, how long has this been an operating CWMU?
A year or two. It's new. It's still on its first COR.
So is this a renewal? So this would be 3 years in?
No, this is one of the two new ones.
Help me understand the difference here.
So-
Why are we doing a new one if it's already existing? This doesn't exist
So
already?
new with public land. So the other two were renewals that they'd already had public land in them. before any CWMU has any public land inside them, then we want it to go to the CWMU advisory committee and then go through the RAC and the board.
So how long has this one been operating as a CWMU in its present boundary?
I think this 2025 is its third year.
Okay.
And the way we'd work that is when they approach us, we'd go through the process, and then every time they renew the CWMU, we'd once again bring the public land through the advisory committee and through the RAC and the board. So if they renew again this summer, you'll hear about it again next year.
So as I understand, there's 3 allowances that allow the inclusion of public lands. What are those 3 allowances?
Let's go up to that slide. Right there, if it's surrounded by private land or otherwise publicly inaccessible, the public land is necessary to establish an enforceable and an identifiable hunt boundary. And inclusion of the public land is necessary to achieve statewide and unit management objectives.
So in light of Josh's point earlier, that the 10th Circuit is now given the same read that the initial judge did, that corner crossing is legal, does the first one have any standing at all? It seems that corner crossing is no longer inaccessible, where previously that was how these were all defined as inaccessible.
So
it
not
seems
all-
that every case now where there is publicly accessible public land that can be corner crossed inside a CWMU, that doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah,
All
and
those should be removed.
just to be clear, like not all of them do have, some of them are completely surrounded by private land. So that it wouldn't be
Clear.
all of them.
Some of
right?
them are.
Um,
But anything that's accessible by corner crossing, it seems like that's no longer inaccessible by that definition.
yeah, we have to look at those for sure. Yeah. And you're probably right on them not being being accessible, but there might be the second one to establish an enforceable and identifiable hunt boundary.
So let's look at T-Bar Ranch first. Can you bring that map up? So which of those criteria is this one being allowed for? Is this public land being allowed for in this case?
So the inaccessible, like, yeah.
So in this case, with that ruling, that's no longer the case.
Yeah, and it's something that we haven't tackled as a division yet. Like we've had some conversation, but we haven't made a determination on.
Tonight's the night. The 10th rule, I mean, this just came out, right? I mean, I understand
Yeah,
it's fresh data.
pretty
What,
new. Yeah.
March 18th. But it's here. Here's our opportunity to do something about it. Let's not wait another year. It seems to me that, I'm getting into comment now, so maybe I won't do that. I'll come back to that. Let's see. Back to Prohibition Springs. I'm curious there why, given that an approved boundary that was exclusively private land was initially approved, why are we now revisiting that and adding a whole bunch of public ground to that?
To make it just a cleaner, more enforceable boundary.
And yet it was approved in its present format with the gray perimeters there previously.
Yeah.
And operated for multiple years. So clearly it's been posted on the perimeter that allows the distinction of where those properties are.
Yeah, they had some issues there. That's why I think they came back to us and said, hey, can we do something about this to make it easier for them and for the public? And so they were seeing in those 2 years of hunting that it was hard.
And maybe
this way-
given that it was brand new, it takes a couple of years to get public sentiment anyway. So by changing it and adding a whole bunch of public land, I'm not convinced that alleviates your issues. In fact, I think it makes it worse.
Yeah.
But let me go on and ask about the trade lands now. How are those trade lands identified? Or the walk-in access? How are those identified?
They'll be on the walk-in access map and our trade land map. We'll post them on both of those.
How do I access that? As Joe Public, I have to use an app now to find out where those are? Is that what you're telling me? So if I have to use an app to find out where the trade lands are, why can't I use the same app to find out where the boundary of the CWMU is?
And you can, but.
So how is that any better? How does that benefit the public at all?
Well, when you look at the trade lands there, if they went and posted every one of those, then you're trying to corner cross every single one. It opens up a really big block of huntable land for the public, right?
But in reality, those trade lands aren't posted right now at all.
Yeah.
They're already open to the public.
Yeah. And they could decide tomorrow to post them. Like, yeah.
So I thought that through. So I went through the hunt planner and just looked at all the species that would be present within the habitat polygons there. Do you know how many species there are that habitat polygons map onto that section that we're trading for?
I'm sure you will tell me. So then I won't have to guess if you just tell me.
It's not a large number. Do we have caller data from deer, elk, moose, antelope, anything that we could look at to see if there's any use in that area?
I know, talking to the biologists, that there's deer up there, there's elk up there. Not so sure about moose. There, you probably get some of those on the lower elevations that have pronghorn, and then has good upland game hunting as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Mike, I have another question. And this is to help, I think, me understand too, because I think in your presentation, you said that the red line that kind of goes with all the little stair steps there on the BLM, that's a fence?
Yes.
That's what that is? What is the line that runs back to the southeast?
That's
through
a road.
A road, okay.
Which ties into the highway.
Which is in the highway that runs back again to that way. All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Chad? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, we'll go for public feedback from Jason.
So the question asked, which best describes your position regarding the CWMU recommendations? There was one person that somewhat disagreed. I was the only vote for a weighted average of 2. A summary of that comment. Just because the land is inaccessible doesn't mean it should be tied into a private CWMU, and that if it's still the public's land, not the state's moneymaker.
All right. Go to public comment now. We have one card from Garrett.
Garrett Slatkoff, representing the Utah chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Our organization opposes the Blackhawk, Ingham Pink, and I think TL Bar was the third one. For several reasons we kind of already discussed here tonight. We did support the Prohibition Springs one though, and felt that this was a model maybe that should be used moving forward, where it was a 2-to-1 ratio in public land given up. I did attend the CWMU Advisory Council meeting earlier this year where this was discussed. Landowner was very willing to work, and based on the the comments that biologists made, it did seem that it wasn't just junk habitat that was being given to the public, and that there were several species that could be hunted in this area. So we did support that specific public land approval on this process. So thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Any other public would like to make a comment? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to RAC for discussion.
Hey, Mike, I have a couple comments.
Okay.
To bring up, and on each one, and I'll just kind of go separately. I've kind of talked about the Prohibition Springs, which then goes into the TL Bar one, and it's the use of the variance. And I brought this up in our CWMU rule rewrite and how that variance gets used. And it seems like it gets used to change the standard. The standard's set, and then we're going to lower the standard with the variance to meet a need of an individual things there. And then the TL Bar one, the way it comes out is the statement was made that without that 640 acres of BLM, they would not even meet the minimum requirement for the deer CWMU. I think they would be 4,400 or something, whatever that number was. So they were short without that, and they have to have that just to meet the minimum. And there, the rule itself says that in its 37.3.3D that only private lands may be included in calculating minimum acreage requirements. So there we had a variance to lower the standard in order to meet the need of an operator that wanted to have this action on there. So I just want to make sure that's in the comment, and the use of the variance. That's, I think, one of those things that I have a hard time with every time the variance is used for certain things like that. And then on the Blackhawk one, the couple parcels were completely surrounded. I think one's a 40, maybe the other was an 80. So it's not a big chunk of ground that the BLM that's used. And those types of things for us, perfectly understandable on that there. And my comment for that one is so that Randy understands, because he made the comment that it is so cumbersome for the BLM. He didn't realize he needed a special use permit, first of all, and that it's really hard to work with the BLM to get one of those. But it is not as hard as it is. It is government paperwork, so yes, it can be cumbersome, but we no longer have to do an EA for these. We actually have a CX, a categorical exclusion, to allow special use permits to happen, which cuts down our time and all that kind of stuff. So it is easier to get one. And if Randy's listening, then he knows, and any other CWMU operators, that process is a whole lot easier, which would also work for guides and outfitters to get those special use permits. And I think that is, I just want to make sure that was addressed on there. And again, also with the Prohibition Springs one, not wanting to post their trade lands, which I think we heard that even from one of the ones that got denied. Again, using that as a variance, using that variance term to lower the standard of posting, trade lands or anything else. And I think we need to be cautious of that. I just want to make sure that's in the record.
Thank you, Eric. Any other comments?
I want to hear what Scott has to say.
Well, I didn't like any of them, as usual. I still don't understand the enforceable and identifiable barrier. And we could go through any one of those maps, particularly the Ingham Peak one. That's the one that really ticked me off there. The high elevation country, there's a public road, Ingham Peak Road, that is used as the northwest boundary. That's a public road built on public land, maintained by the county grader, that's paid for by the public, that now becomes the boundary for a private unit, and it's well off of that boundary. So we've given up thousands of acres of public ground that we created, right? We built that road, and now we're being asked to give up all the ground to the east of it because the public paid for a public road. The same thing happened on Prohibition Springs with the new fence line. The existing boundary goes right down to private property, and they're requesting following a fence line that's built on BLM land using public dollars, and now we're excluding ourselves from that public access. It's just ridiculous. You look down on the south end of that one, there's a big chunk of BLM that's included, 2 sections. There's no fence at the south end of that. There's no justification why there has to be that boundary there and you have to follow some wiggly boundary somewhere else. I don't see any justification for similarity across even a particular unit or CWMU where there's an enforceable and identifiable boundary at all. I don't see it. And particularly when you start looking at multiple ones, there's no reason that you can say, well, we did it here because of this reason. We're consistent. Baloney. There's no way. I think in light of the 10th Circuit Court's ruling that they upheld the corner crossing, that every section now that's accessible by corner crossing is accessible and it's no longer inaccessible. So the allowance number 1, where it's inaccessible, doesn't apply. And I think every CWMU that has accessible land by corner crossing, that piece needs to come out now. It no longer meets the definition. And then the third one is to achieve statewide and unit management objectives. There again, that one is so vague. It doesn't say statewide or, it says statewide and. There's no way that 3 or 4 animals are going to make any difference on the statewide management objectives. That's another criteria that's totally worthless. So my perspective again is I don't see any reason to include public lands in any CDMU.
Thank you, Scott. Eric?
Yeah, so, and Scott, I agree with you on the Prohibition Springs one. As I looked at it, the amount of BLM that's included in there, those little jagged lines, I think having the fence was actually, to me, palatable on that end, and I could support that one there. I have concerns about any time, a piece of public land is put in to meet the minimum acreage, and I think we've seen that on several in the past, and it's hard to get away from that kind of thing. But yeah, the Prohibition Springs one, I was probably more leaning to say, yeah, I can support that with the BLM grounds that it's attached into that, included into it, as opposed to some of the other ones. And I just also to shout out to Mike for making the comment during the CWMU Advisory Council that BLM and Forest Service keep bringing up this with that. So I appreciate your mention of that. So we're on the public lands thing, and then also with the permitting. So.
Yeah, thank you. Any other?
But I'm not misunderstanding this in that just because it's a defensible CWMU boundary, it no longer precludes the public, right?
Say that again. No, I'm calling you, Josh. You're saying, I know, sorry, my phone. You're saying, hey, there's a road, maybe there's a road going, you can see that road's a good defining mark.
I
can still access it, right? Is that what
Well,
you're saying?
yeah, I mean, I understand the idea of a defensible boundary, and we've talked about on this rack number of cases where there's a canyon, or there's in one case up near Cinnamon Creek, there's a D9 cat that ran right up the mountain, and it's pretty obvious where that boundary is. But given the corner crossing ruling, that defensible boundary no longer precludes hunters from accessing what is within the CWMU so long as they're on public ground. So I agree with you, Scott, 100%, but I guess it agitates me less now given these developments in the courts.
I just don't, and we're on the same page because that's, affects us on how we even operate just with, projects that we do corner to corner type things too. But I guess I don't know how the DWR is even going to be able to address it, because they're going to all want to be grandfathered in and have those corner sections grandfathered in. And we did go through on the CWM rule and allow corner to corner private lands to be included, which in the rule previously was not allowed if it was a corner to corner.
And I agree, it should be. Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's where, if it's given to the private, the individual to include that it should be, taken out that way too. But how is the BLM going to do it? And then how many of the operators are going to say, well, we've been doing it for 20 years. You can't take that away from us. And where does it go? But I don't know if that's something that if a motion we make is even going to go anywhere other than just on the paper. So, but.
Well, having sat through that meeting, Prohibition Springs, I think, is a no-brainer, win-win for everybody. They only hunt antelope, and they're opening so much more acreage to people who can hunt deer and elk and antelope and chukars and mourning doves. And the way I don't think they I mean, I know Chad said that they kind of got, to do trade lands or walk-in access, but trade lands wouldn't work for how much that CWMU is giving up to open up their private lands. And so me personally, I would hope that passes the board, the Prohibition Springs. The other ones, you can go watch my votes on them over the years. I have some heartburn with some of those inclusions too. I do know that whatever motion is made, that you can direct the division to consider the corner to corner issue now that it is such. But I don't think that's going to be solved this year. And so any other discussion? Ready for
I'll
a
just make
motion?
one more comment there. I agree with you on that, Mike. When it was presented as just a pronghorn CWMU, I think that kind of changed things to where, that all those straight lands or walk-in access only ones made a big difference that way, that it was open to all other species, not just for pronghorn on those straight lands. I think that was a huge, and I think it's been brought up a couple times even by, I can't remember your name, so I apologize, but their group, that's a benefit that wins. And I think that does show that cooperation that what this is ultimately should be. And I don't have any heartburn with the Black Hawk one. I think those 120 acres or whatever it actually totaled out to be, that's in the heart of that is pretty, that's justifiable on our end to allow that to be included. And I think that's kind of the spirit of the law there too, the way it was done. And I would probably vote support those two and not support the other two.
Is that a motion?
No, it wasn't. It was just a comment. It's part of the discussion.
I'm trying to
but
move it along. So
I could make a motion.
I'm open to handling this however the RAC wants to. If there's a couple that you feel like are good that we can pass, then we can deny a couple, however you guys want to.
I've got one more question for Chad. Where did we settle on the non-contiguous lands with the last revision on CWMUs?
If it was somebody that was a landowner in the CWMU within 4 miles and at least 640 acres.
And it can be any number of parcels within that 4 miles?
Of the main block.
So if there's 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, it's all fine.
Yeah.
And I think a more important note real quick is on the one that got denied, they had a couple sections that were outside of that, and then they wanted to lump it together with the private in between those incorporated, and it got voted down. And I think the CWMU advisory board did a great job not approving that additions for the non-contiguous lands, which then also had or at least had the BLM land trying to attach those together. I think that was well done by the CWMU advisory board.
Sorry, Chad, I'm going to ask you another question. So non-contiguous lands that are within a certain mileage. So if somebody has a parcel, a 640 acre piece a mile away, they can include that. But what if there's another piece that's is it from the main body of the CWMU, or is it from each parcel that's included in the CWMU?
Just the main body.
Okay. All right, do we have a motion? Ready for a motion?
Well, let me try one. I'll make a motion that based on the 10th Circuit's ruling, any CWMU that is establishing public land within the private perimeter due to inaccessibility, because that no longer applies, that those public lands need to be removed.
I don't think we have the authority in this meeting to do that. We have the authority in this meeting to recommend to the Wildlife Board that any public lands in those be looked at. But I don't think that's up for, I don't think all the CWMUs with corner to corner are on the table for us to make a motion on. Because
I would say, I'm not the lawyer here for the division, but I wonder if there's been enough notice on that broader topic, right? So the notice is on.
I think we're giving notice tonight, right? We're starting the conversation. This is not going to go anywhere tonight. We're having the conversation.
And
I
we've
just
been
want to
having the
make, I want to
conversation.
make a strong point.
And I appreciate that, and I want you to make your strong point, but I want you to do it in a way that it doesn't just get thrown away, because the way you made your motion, I feel like that's not even going to be able to be presented to the Wildlife Board. Because those aren't on the table. Every CWMU in the state is not on the table tonight. And so if you were to word your motion to recommend that ask the Wildlife Board to direct the division to, in light of the 10th Circuit Court ruling, to address every corner to corner, then that would, but we can't make the motion that we just remove them. And I could be wrong. Kyle Maynard's not on.
That, I'm fine with that. That's fine.
Okay. Well, I'm not making that motion, so, but I'll let you.
Well, as they come up for renewal, that would be the time to reevaluate the public land within holdings.
Yeah. I would hope that we could do it without having to wait for the renewals, but if that's what the process, so be it.
All right, I'll try a motion. I move that we accept the 2 new applications for Black Hawk and Prohibition Springs as presented by the division, and to deny the 2 renewal applications of Ingham Peak and DWR Ranch. Yeah, so it would be to accept the 2 new applications, which is Black Hawk and Prohibition Springs, as they were presented, and then to deny the 2 renewal applications for Ingham Peak and DWR Ranch.
You have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Have a motion and a second. Does everybody understand the motion? All in favor, raise your hand. 2, 3, 4. John?
Yeah, I'm not in favor.
Okay. Any opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4.
She'd be in a chair. The last day.
Well, that's fun. So we have 4 in favor and 4 opposed. And to maintain the discussion, I'm going to vote in favor. So that passes 5-4. Okay. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 9. Changes to WMA exemptions and license requirements by Chelsea Duke. Would you like to give us a brief summary?
I would, and then I would also request the privilege of adding a few additions based on the public comment. So first, House Bill 309 was a bill that was passed by the Utah legislature during the 2025 session and went into effect May 7th. Essentially, this is a requirement to hold a valid hunting, fishing, or combination license on WMAs in the 1st or 2nd class. This is not a rule that is implemented by the Wildlife Board, but instead is in state law. The DWR and the Wildlife Board are now charged with implementing and upholding this new law. So therefore, this rule proposal before you is meant to define terms and additionally make some exemptions to the requirement as permitted by law. Second, I just wanted to clarify the authority of the Wildlife Board in relation to this new legislation. This isn't a typical, so I wanted to put this out there, that the bill states that the Wildlife Board may not exempt individuals based that the individual is not engaged in hunting, trapping, or fishing within a wildlife management area. Therefore, the scope of the board's authority is limited to the following 2 items. The bill specifically outlines the Wildlife Board's rulemaking authority, stating the Wildlife Board may make rules to define purposes of 1, what is meant to be expressly exempt under this title, and 2, what constitutes an educational program or education or visitor center. So the rule proposal in front of you is to add additional definitions to rule to clarify this new law, and then also to add some additional exemptions, including division employees, contractors, and some additional land that is not owned by the division, but managed by the division as a WMA.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any questions for Chelsea on this? Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to clarify that I understand that road access through, the WMAs, a lot of that land borders federal land, and there are roads. My understanding is that under the definition of highway, that if you're passing through on road, that is fine, and anyone, if you don't have a license, can still go through to access public land beyond the WMA.
Correct. That exemption is in the state law.
Okay. And my other question though is, so you're saying we can still recommend exemptions to the board for this, or you're saying we cannot recommend exemptions?
The language is confusing. So what that basically says is that the wildlife board cannot adopt rules of exemptions because people aren't hunting and fishing. Does that make sense? So we couldn't say, I'm going to exempt individuals on this property because they're bird watching.
Gotcha. Okay. But do you think that still is going to apply to federal employees that have land bordering and say we need to access not via road, but we need to get to a fence line, that borders that WMA, and we need to have our employees walk to it, and that kind of exemption is still being allowed, or that's not?
That would be within the applicable. I do want to say that there is an avenue that already allows us to do so within the law. So if you read through the second section of the state law, not the rule proposals, it says is permitted to engage in the use under a contract with or other permission given by the division. So in that case, we could either enter into a contract with a federal partner, or we could give express permission for them to access a WMA without a license to do that kind of work.
And that permission looks like, aside from the contract, the express permission, what does that look like? Is that an email, a conversation, a specific letter?
We have not discussed that with the attorneys to make sure that it falls within the law, but it would need to be some sort of formal approval, and we would need to develop a policy, not a rule, but a policy to make sure that we were all enforcing that the same way.
Okay.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, hey, I see in the public comments, there's a lot of concern voiced by hikers and bikers that they would need to purchase a license to hike and bike on the properties, the WMAs. Can you just discuss that a little bit?
Sure. So I'll just start by saying that the division is not the one that put this legislation through. That was done at the state legislature level. So what I will share is my impressions and my understanding of how the bill came about and its general purpose. So what I'll start by saying is that WMAs are not multiple use like other public lands in the state of Utah. Our sole purpose and what we are tasked to do with these lands is to manage them for wildlife purposes. So a lot of the times that's what we're going to do for big game winter range or hunting and angling opportunities. Additionally, in many situations, if we approve or allow activities that will directly be inconsistent with those purposes, sometimes the federal government can come and step in and deem us non-compliant with Pittman-Robertson or Dingell-Johnson grant funds. So I think one of the reasons that this bill came about, and it's been introduced for a couple of years in a row at the state legislature, is because there's the properties that we're seeing along the Wasatch Front are being loved to death. Lots of recreational uses are happening, and it is difficult to manage these properties for those intended purposes. I will say that this new law does not prohibit folks from coming onto our properties to hike and bike and recreate in other ways, but it does require them to hold a valid hunting, fishing, or combination license to do those activities. Does that answer your question, or do you want me to continue?
No, that does answer my question. So the unstated intention is to decrease the use of these areas by those who do not hunt and fish. Would that be accurate?
Or alternatively, that all that use these properties are contributing to their management and the funding that goes into purchasing and managing these lands, not to exclude individuals per se.
Fair enough. Well done. Thank you.
Can I invite Mark Farmer, your regional habitat manager, up? Do you want to say that? Okay. Mark would like me to make the comment that this only applies to adults. So if you're under the age of 18, this law does not apply to you. Thanks, Mark.
Chelsea, does the division have the authority to implement this statewide?
We do not. The law, the way that it is written, is for Class 1 and Class 2 counties, which includes Salt Lake, Utah,
Weber and Davis.
Weber and Davis, thank you. It's so new, I'm still getting used to it.
Okay. You mentioned, maybe I misheard, but you talked about that a drive-through on one of the WMAs in northern Utah would require a permit to access the other lands on the back side of it. Did I mishear that?
Are you maybe talking about Farmington Bay
Yeah.
Waterfowl Management Area? Yes, so this property, it includes property that was purchased and is owned by the Division of Wildlife Resources, but additionally, there are sections of that property that are sovereign lands. So in order to access those sovereign lands with a vehicle, you must drive onto division property and then make your way onto sovereign lands. That is a private road that we may close at any time. It is not a highway as defined in the code. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. That makes sense. And then, is there any flexibility with non-residents, or are they have to buy a non-resident hunting and fishing license? Or if they have a 3-day license, does that work for the whole year, or only for the time that license is valid for? Could they access a WMA?
So what it says is a valid hunting and fishing license or combination license. And then you could use, so any of our licenses that we offer on our website would fall within that. Those 3-day licenses would include that. If any member of law enforcement knows what the rules are about using it, do you mean like I use it one day here and then I'm going to wait 3 months and use it one day?
Well, I think that they're for consecutive days. And so I think you answered my question by
Is that
saying they're
accurate?
valid licenses.
Okay. And
So-
it sounds like, yes, they are for consecutive days.
And one last question for me, I think. Oh, 2 more. Has the division looked at, like, we got a ton of emails and comments, and I'm sure you saw them. And many of those said that, yes, they were open to having the division contact them.
Mhm.
Has the division thought about contacting those individuals with more of an educational approach as to the purpose of the WMAs, that maybe they aren't mountain bike tracks as their main purpose? I mean, has the division thought about contacting those individuals?
So I did reach out to several individuals about specific areas of concern. So we had several members of the public reach out that were concerned about hiking to Timpanogos Mountain, like the peak of the mountain. So I reached out to those individuals to show them maps of where WMAs were in relation to other public lands. I did the same with Causey Reservoir, and there was a comment about the golf course at Hobble Creek. And so I made sure to reach out to those individuals to ensure that they knew that they did not have to have a hunting or fishing license to access that public land that they were talking about.
Okay. And the last thing I have is, who defines what a volunteer is? Or with this new change that you're proposing tonight, does that take away the volunteer aspect of exemption?
So we put that into rule. That's one of our proposals, and we don't believe we have a definition, at least in this rule, of what a volunteer is. But what the proposal says is that they're serving in some official capacity, right? So you are volunteering at the division's request. So we would consider that dedicated hunters or people involved at a ribbon cutting ceremony, things like that. That's what we would consider a volunteer.
And is there any chance that down the road somebody else could consider it, like those who repair mountain bike trails or those kind of things that are activities on the WMA but aren't the purpose of the WMAs?
Yes, so to answer that question, in order to do any sort of work on a wildlife management area, you have to have a permit or other contract in place. So it would be an unlawful use of division lands to just come onto a property and start building a trail. So you would have to have a permit, and then you would be a volunteer under that contract.
So, and I'm just looking at what I know, a little bit what I know, and Mark has dealt with this and maybe can answer this question a little bit, but on the Timpanogos WMA, there was many miles of mountain bike trails and many of them were closed, and they had mountain bikers go up and help improve the existing trails. And with those people accessing it to under the division, because the division was approved them to go in there and do that, would they then not have to have that license requirement?
Yes, so let me answer your question kind of in a roundabout way, but stay with me because I want to make sure that this is explained well. We do have several groups, usually youth groups, that are involved in practice, if you will, for mountain biking on the Timpanogos WMA. We issue coaches in the schools special use permits to allow for those teams to use those properties. And in addition to that, their payment to the division is service projects. And so that whole scope would be included under a contract, which would therefore be an exemption to the hunting and fishing license rules, so, or law. So the coach, the students, even though they're minors, and anybody associated with that permit would fall under that exemption from the hunting and fishing license requirement.
And is that only for the adults? Is that only during the time that they do the project, or is that year round?
It's only for the dates that we list in the permit, which would include the dates that they plan to use in practice, and addition, the service dates that they're going to be out there doing the project that we've asked them to do.
Okay, so they can only access it on certain dates. You can actually control that.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Do you have anything to add to that, Mark?
That's about right. Sometimes these folks are doing trail work, but if in their official capacity of adopting and maintaining trails, they would be exempt, but not, on the weekend to go mountain bike riding on their own time, then that's not okay. But when they're doing official activities, that's fine. And this is all new to us, so we're trying to figure it out too. It's going to be, I feel real sorry for our law enforcement guys. I said, you're going to have to put a toll booth up on Timpanogos. So that'll be a fun one.
You'd probably hire a whole new employee with what you'd make.
And I will say it is a condition of their permit that they keep an electronic or physical copy of that permit with them at all times while on the WMA. So that way, if law enforcement were to, ask them to provide their proof of allowance on the WMA, they could show that and show that they're in compliance.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
It's like you've got.
Yeah, Chelsea, how are you going to handle? Well, I think John had a question first. Let's go to John. I just saw that he had a question first.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was wondering, has the division considered having another option that a runner, hiker, biker could purchase that's not necessarily specifically a hunting or fishing license, but perhaps a recreational use license or access permit that enables them to feel good about contributing to wildlife management in the state and maintenance of the area, but doesn't actually say that it's a hunting or fishing license if they don't hunt and fish?
Yeah, so I can answer that question in two parts. The first part is that the way the law was written, the division has no authority to offer any additional license. So the way the law was written, it specifically says a valid hunting, fishing, or combination license. The division has no other ability to offer any sort of additional license for non-consumptive or non-traditional uses. Additionally, I want to say that hunting and fishing licenses do more than just that one drop in the bucket for that money. Hunting and fishing licenses, because we don't get general funds, we don't get much general funds from the state legislature to manage these properties. It's rare that we get a general fund for even acquisition of these lands. So we really rely on license dollars and then what we call excise tax on hunting and angling equipment. And those mathematical equations are all based on license sales. So the way that we generate revenue and the way that we are able to maintain these properties is through that those funds. So with the additional revenue that we would expect to get from this new law change, that money is going to directly go into these properties and associated wildlife populations on them.
Okay, thank you.
Chelsea, when I look at the rule that's being proposed, I get that your hands are tied a little bit, but how are you going to handle pre-existing rights? So the exemption doesn't talk about if you have a pre-existing right to be on the property. For example, the Alta ditch on 10 WMA, the water company has a right to be there. They had it way before the WMA was owned by the state. So are you going to honor those, and how are you going to honor those, I guess?
Let me pull up the law to get to this. So in 5A3, there is also noted that you do not have to have a hunting or fishing license if you are permitted to engage in the use or to access the land in accordance with a property right. So in this circumstance, anybody that has a power line or an oil and gas line that goes through a WMA, they have a property right. And so if that individual working for that company in that capacity is entering the WMA and has the right to do that work, that is a property right and will be honored in lieu of the hunting and fishing license.
But probably only within the easement that they are allowed to be on.
Correct, and to get to and fro, because
Yeah.
sometimes they're located, in different areas of the WMA.
I'm just worried there's going to be a bunch of adults that are now going to identify as 18-year-olds. I'm just saying, guys, it's the reality.
Any other questions? Okay, questions from the audience? Seeing none, we will go to Jason we do have one. Please come up to the mic and state your name. We will do comments after, but if you could fill out a comment card in the foyer, that would be appreciated. So this is any questions you have, and then we'll do comments a little bit later.
Awesome.
Perfect, thanks.
My name's Dave Hawks. I'm actually one of the coaches, a high school mountain bike coach in Orem. I also work with the Utah Valley Trail Alliance. Let me just start by expressing appreciation for the cooperation with you guys, and our ability to use the trails has been awesome. Just as a side note, for the last couple of years, we've been contributing in the range of about 500 hours a year to maintaining the trails, specifically in the Timpanogos Wildlife Management Area. The questions we have, I've got 3 questions. I realize they're not going to be able to be answered right now, so just throw these out there. What is enforcement going to look like? In the past, just enforcing the rules and regulations in place has been a challenge. And so with even more, we're curious about enforcement. Also, as a trail user, I have a fishing license. I use it almost enough to justify it. But in terms of being a trail user, like just what can I expect for a return on my investment? If I'm buying a fishing or hunting license strictly to use a WMA, I would appreciate knowing something about my investment, how that's going to affect me, that place. And then I understand why you're doing hunting and fishing license, not a third license. But how are you going to quantify a trail user versus somebody, a hunter or a fisher and that kind of thing? So again, questions I realize can't be answered tonight, but at least want to get those out there. So
All right, thank you. Do you have any ideas on those questions?
I can do my best. Do you want to speak to law enforcement?
As far as enforcement of this rule / bill goes, we will start heavily on the education side of it. But we do want to document circumstances where we run into people just to be able to report back to the legislature, because it's going to be important to see kind of the circumstances they fall themselves in. We do have a WMA enforcement plan in place that has gone out to our officers, and honestly, as it's brand new and we're trying to, getting people used to it a little bit, that, like I said, we will lean heavily on education, verbal warnings, some written warnings. If you get multiple written warnings, you could be cited, just based on, we have to enforce the law, but the plan is to lean heavily on the education initially.
Can I just mention there's a Google form that the officers will be filling out to document the users on the WMA?
There will be a Google form that the officers will be using to document the use on the WMA.
Yes.
Okay. Just getting that on the record.
Yeah, so to update on that a little bit as well, the form that the officers are filling out is collecting information about the use and what kinds of activities that person is engaged in when they are requested to show their hunting or fishing license. So I think that's hopefully we're going to start being able to collect information on that. We've also discussed what we need to do in order to collect that information when you purchase a hunting or a fishing license. So there's some things that we need to work out as far as that data collection goes, and hopefully that will address some questions about return on investment and things of that nature.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Okay, any more questions? All right, we'll turn it over to Jason for the public input.
Okay, the question asks, which best describes your position regarding the new license requirements to enter WMAs? We had 1 strongly agree, 1 somewhat agree, 2 neither agree nor disagree, 2 somewhat disagree, and 11 strongly disagree, for 17 total votes with a weighted average of 1.76. Kind of a summary of some of the comments, several comments expressing a desire to work together on access, trail maintenance, and management, and that the funds should go directly to manage the WMA for trails and recreation. Several comments would like other license options. There was 1 comment stating there should be exceptions for youth, teams, and coaches. And then several comments stating people shouldn't have to pay to access WMAs.
All right, thank you. Okay, we'll move over to the public comment portion. You'll have 3 minutes to comment and come up to this mic and state your name. The first will be David Schallenberger, and the next will be Clay. So David.
Thank you. So I know it's a new law. It's really a matter of, I'm Dave Schallenberger. I live right at the base of the Timp WMA. I work with 3 different youth bike groups, work with the Orem City Council, and I'm newly elected. I'm in the legislature, so I was part of this bill. It's sort of like, how do we get, this current problem, implement it, and work with all these different groups, make them happy. And then there's going to be ongoing stuff. How do we deal with this in the future? Like a recreation license, right? That's not part of the current bill. That would be a future resolution, future solution. So how do we do this now? We would ask, we're up using these things. I've talked with Director Peck and with Casey Snyder, the bill sponsor. And so they've made it very clear. They educate me on the background of the WMA that's wildlife focused. Okay, we get that. We want to be part of the solution. It's going to be they're going to continue to bike and hike and use these trails, and they can push back, they can fight, and there can be, contention and fighting there, but they don't want that. These groups want to work with the wildlife groups and with the RAC to find ways to work synergistically, or, in a way that benefits both people, that helps the wildlife up there and creates sort of a buffer to help with an education, a huge education aspect with the public, with the hikers, the bikers, with everyone out there. You look forward over the next 10, 20, 30 years, Utah County is expected to have a higher population than Salt Lake County. And it sort of is mind-blowing when you think about the population that's going to be coming to Utah County. So finding ways to work with that and incorporate those people. And we sort of see that as, if we put the wildlife first, how do we create those buffer zones so that we don't have bikers going right past the feeding areas or the nesting areas? And so if we're paying into the recreation licenses, or whether you call it a fishing or a recreation license, or find ways to differentiate between those two, find ways to create these trails that create sort of a buffer zone. So not that there's wildlife space or recreation, but that there's a buffer zone or different areas where they can work together and you're not directly impacting where the wildlife are going and where they're eating and nesting and that type of thing. But we want to be part of the solution. We want to work together. And one thing I would also add is that we volunteer. These guys are putting in hundreds and thousands of man hours in these areas and up in the forest area, Forest Service territory on the other side of Dry Canyon. And so we've worked with you guys. We've shown that we want to work with you guys financially too. But as we volunteer, also maybe expand that scope. I know they do this with OHV as they do trail work. They work off the value of that license. Maybe expand that to, okay, you're going to use this the whole summer rather than like only on teamwork days. So, because otherwise it's sort of like what Braden said, where it's like I identify as an 18-year-old. If it only works during team practices, then all of a sudden every ride I'm going to be doing is a team practice and the team didn't show up, or I'm doing recon for our next ride to check the trails for our teamwork, but all of a sudden every ride's an official ride, right? So you're going to play games. So if we're putting in the man hours to make the work up there, then let's try to use some common sense in making that work the whole season. But anyway, thanks for your time and appreciate all you guys do.
Clay?
Hi, my name is Clay. I am a mountain biker who's biked at the TIMP WMA. I'm also a hunter who's hunted the Wasatch West plenty of times. And I think the way that the question was worded in the public feedback made it sound like, what do you think? Like, is this good or bad? And I think Chelsea did a great job at explaining that, look, this isn't going away. This is something that's sticking no matter what. So I was going to comment in favor of it, but you did a good job. So I think the only things I would add is that I appreciate what law enforcement has said about educating people. I think that the general public has no clue or is kind of ignorant to the different divisions that manage different lands. They kind of just lump public land into all one thing, and they're kind of going, whoa, we're losing our public land, instead of going, oh, that's the BLM, this is the division, this is why the division manages that. So I think the education is really important. And I also, obviously Chelsea said this is up to the legislator, not to you guys, but I liked what John said about trying to find a different license that those users can, that non-consumptive users can purchase. Colorado already has a similar one for their version of WMAs. Costs like $42 and change, which is about the same as our fishing license, which would be a good thing for the legislatures to try to implement. And that would help the DWR track why people are using their WMAs. But thanks, Chelsea, for kind of clearing everything up pretty well.
All right, thanks, Clay. Any other comments? Did you have a comment you'd want to make, or just the questions? Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, so sounds great. All right, we'll close public comment and turn it back to the RAC. I do want to start because the public comments that we received were really concerning to me. There was an entitlement there that I found kind of disturbing. that we made a mountain bike trail on a wildlife management area, so we deserve to bike on that mountain bike trail. And many of those mountain bike trails were made illegally. And under the guidance of the DWR, and especially Mark Farmer, went up and worked to close some of those and keep some of those, in being a good neighbor, knowing that that we're not going to stop all of that. And what would a non-hunter or non-fisherman gain by buying a $40 license to hike and bike on lands that are set aside specifically for wildlife management areas? Well, what they get is they would get the opportunity to access and use those lands. And I don't know, I think the only other close example I have to show that to those public would be Sundance. 10,000 acres, dedicated trails, hundreds of dollars a year to buy a pass. Almost like, I don't remember what the last time it was, but I thought it was like $40 or $60 for a day pass. So for $40, the public is able to access those lands for 8 months because they are closed for the winter. So I think there's a real failure and a disconnect with the public to understand the purpose of a wildlife management area. It's not a mountain bike management area or a hiking management area. And I think that's on the state and the division, and even Orem City, close partner there, to help educate those around. And I really appreciate the non-consumptive hunters and fishermen that show up and talk about that. I mean, it is a multi-use. We're not just going to lock it out, but I think there is a return on the investment. That $40, go 40 times, that's $1 a day. I don't know. I mean, $40, I can't gas up a Kia for $40. So I'm highly in favor of this, getting skin in the game, and it's, our hands are tied. The legislators, in their wisdom, because they are very smart, they presented this. So.
Mike, I wanted to make a comment too, just to address some of the public comments here tonight and that we got online. I mean, I'm by no means a fan of special use fees. I don't think anybody is. And for years and years, I drive into the Wasatch Cache National Forest and pay my special use fee, and I always bristled at it. And then a few years ago, I saw a presentation. I think his name's Dave Whitkind. He's the superintendent of the Wasatch. You went to Wasatch Cache. And he told me that it was the most visited national park in the United States, which I didn't know, or national forest in the United States, which I didn't know. And he also told us how many rolls of toilet paper they bought annually. And it was an astounding number. He told us how many rolls of toilet paper they put in one pit toilet on one Labor Day weekend. And it was an astounding number. And so I think we're going to see more and more of these kinds of fees. And so I think a lot of the pushback is a fee in general, regardless of any fee. But I think we have to get our heads around that, especially as the federal government's changing its structure financially and otherwise. We need to get around the idea of taking ownership of our places that we love and cherish. But the one comment that's been repeated is, why do I need a hunting and fishing license? Why can't we use a special use permit fee or a recreation fee? And I think what the public fails to realize is that hunting and fishing license is matched with PR and DJ funds. And so that $40 is multiplied beyond that $40 and matched by federal funding. And so I think for that reason, it is a good choice that the legislature made to require a fishing or hunting license as opposed to some other, call it whatever you want, recreation fee, because we're actually receiving more than $40. So yeah, I just want to make that comment.
Any other comments, Drew?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding too. Essentially, you all understand that we're getting these and we're not allowed to make any sort of exemptions, maybe suggestions though. I guess my big thing is, obviously this is only really those 4 counties that we're looking at. That majority of that would then be the Uinta-Wasatch Cache National Forest that Forest Service is dealing with. But knowing that forest, there is a lot of WMAs that border Forest Service land, and sure, there might be some roads that go through, but there's just easy instances where I can think of employees needing to do their official duties. And that might be by walking, that might be on horseback if, a fence has failed that borders and we have cattle that have gotten loose and are on WMA. And in our official duties, we might be the ones out getting that. Or if there's fire, and it's from Forest Service spreads or something. So I just think it would be good to see some amount of suggestion exemption that Forest Service employees accessing federal land, have that ability if it's not on road. And Timpanogos also is another one with trails, obviously, and there's a couple other in Hobble Creek. But yeah, so if we can't make an exemption, I'd at least like to see the board consider maybe how do we word that in, and if it is in law, at least how we get that started, I guess. But
Did you address that? I mean,
So we do have the suggested exemption for DWR employees, volunteers, contractors, and such. Additionally, I would say that for our partners and for folks that we work with often when it comes to these types of properties, that second classification that I said about an existing contract or other permission given by the division, that is what we would most likely utilize in these specific circumstances if it wasn't specifically exempt in rules. We did try to keep the rule exemptions as clean as possible. You'll also see that we didn't exempt first responders or things like that, because they have these other ways that they can get around this law, so to speak, because that trumps that. So there's a lot of other pieces and components that maybe we didn't address with our proposed rule changes, but we could address through other avenues that are legal.
Yeah, Chelsea, I think I was like Mike. I like the idea of saying, hey, this was bought by Pittman Robertson PRDJ funds, right? So let's use it for what it's for. There are areas though that I was looking at Onyx right now and going, okay, there's a paved road on Hobble Creek, paved Parkway Trail, like that's been there for years. I went to college at BYU back in 2004, and that trail was there. So it's like, are we really going to tell folks you can't use the Hobble Creek Parkway Trail anymore unless you have a hunting and fishing license? Like, just the reality there. I get that it's a legislative action, yes, but the reality is not. It's what's going to happen is folks will say we don't want the state to own any more land that's already out there. You're going to hear that even more. And I think there's kind of a balance here of, yeah, we want to have wildlife management areas, but if there's an existing road, an existing trail that goes somewhere, it's going to look pretty silly to suddenly put up a big sign. And I've seen the signs are already going out, right? And so you're saying you can't jog on the Hobble Creek Trail. They do that Hobble Creek half marathon, and you can't use that trail now. I don't know. That's just one of those silly changes that I think we need to find an exemption to, kind of go with Drew's comment that we probably just need to tweak this a bit more. I don't know what we can do today, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that inability to exempt just based on non-consumptive use, that does limit what kinds of exemptions we can propose to the board. I will say for things like half marathons and the like, folks are welcome to get special use permits for those activities, and we welcome that. It actually is an unlawful use of division lands to hold activities and events without those permits. So we do encourage folks, and I think that's just done through education. We're putting up signs to educate the public and let them know about this. Additionally, we're working really hard on our real property records to ensure that if there's public easements, those are captured and then those are signed appropriately, so the public can know that they have a real property right and are allowed to use that existing trail.
Josie, I thought you did an outstanding job tonight. really good. And I think if everybody that wrote those negative comments were in here to listen to what you said, I think that number would be way better than 1.7. So this is a work in progress. I think the educational side from law enforcement makes a lot of sense. This makes a lot of sense to me, but you really helped me understand this whole process. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well said. Any other comments?
I'll make a motion if there is a motion to be made. I mean, what can you do? I'll make a motion to accept the legislative law as it stands.
Jim is running for the legislature now. I'll second it, Joe. I know what you're saying. I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion to accept as presented.
As presented.
And second, any other discussion? Okay, call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
That passes unanimous. Thank you, Chelsea. Well done. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the presence of Director Riley Peck in the audience. So, and
Would I have him stand?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Riley, can you stand, Director Peck, just so we know, we want to recognize you, people don't know the new director is. President
Yeah,
Peck, yeah.
Yeah. Should have brought my gavel, got us back to order. Okay. Well, yes, Representative, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for, not Representative Peck, President Peck, and all you guys being here. I know this is late, it's getting late into a Tuesday night, so thank you for your time and putting this into all this and your energy into making this state awesome. So I really appreciate that.
Well, and we
So-
appreciate your ability and to come here and to present and to talk to us, because that's, the dialogue's important, because I think we all have to work together. So it's great.
Well, and you nailed it on the head. Like, it was sort of a light bulb going off for me when you talked about not the arrogance, but what was the word you used? The
Entitlement.
and the
Yeah.
entitlement. So as they explained to me that how it was bought, and how this was used, and that the bikers don't pay into the system, but they complain and they use the trails and they complain. So that was a light bulb moment sort of for me. It's like, yeah, we need to be part of this system also. Come on, guys, let's go.
Yeah. Well, and since this is
it's a
on
big
YouTube, I had to probably retract a few of those words I said, but they're out there now. So thank you for being part of the process.
Yes. I've got to go home and watch my kids all week, so.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, we're moving on to number 10, Sage Grouse Translocation by Heather Talley. Got it.
All right. Do you have any questions for me? You want any recap or anything
Maybe just a brief recap like we've done with
A brief
others.
recap,
Be
yeah.
great, yes, thanks.
Sure. Just asking for approval for the next 5 years to translocate sage grouse from the Blue Diamond Mountain and Parker Mountain areas to Tabby Mountain in Strawberry SGMA, Sage Grouse Management Area, and the Tidwell Mitogi Mountain that's also in the Parker area, which is why we would take them from a different location so they don't just go back to their source site, and then also to the Browns Park area. And this is essentially just, there's already grouse there. They're just not in huge numbers because there was a deterioration of habitat. And now that we've restored that usable space or that habitat back, we want to help increase distribution, which will just help grow the core and help sage grouse numbers in totality.
Perfect, thank you. Questions from the RAC? Drew?
And I might have missed it in the presentation. When you decide on these areas for release, is it mostly just looking at LEC counts from previous years, the habitat, what goes into that, and what excludes other areas from getting translocations?
Great question. And a lot of what goes into this is what employees, what are other stakeholders, the time, the availability, the equipment that's already owned. And so when we had the Northeast region first approach us about, hey, we've got some resources to take birds to these areas, and we know we've got great habitat restored, but birds just aren't distributing into those areas because of their fidelity to their current nesting and brood rearing sites. That's what started that conversation. And then we had the same situation in the Parker Mountain as well. And so we put that out through the RDCC and came back with no comments.
Have you noticed any impacts from avian influenza in sage grouse?
No.
When would these releases start? Would that be not till like next year or?
Great question. Yeah, so we would start the Tabby Mountain releases would start this August. We'd be translocating juvenile males in hopes to establish some new lekking sites that coming spring. Then some females and males to the Tabby Mountain the following spring as well. The Parker Mountain, that's just a release site that we do want to take birds to, but we don't have the current structure set up for translocation at the moment, but we just wanted to leave that available for the next few years so that when resources do become available, that we can utilize that.
Any other questions? Okay, questions from the audience on this topic? Okay, seeing none, turn it over to Jason.
Yeah, there were no public comments on this agenda item.
Okay, and we have one public comment. Garrett.
Garrett Slatkoff, representing Utah chapter Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We support this this proposal. Sage grouse populations obviously are struggling throughout the West here, so any initiative to help boost our populations here in Utah, we'd be very supportive of. So thanks.
Thank you. And just because we didn't get any feedback doesn't mean it's not important. It just means it's not controversial.
Thank you, Mike.
So, you're welcome. Okay, bring it back to the RAC for discussion.
I'll just go ahead and make a motion to approve as presented.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion on the table to approve is presented with a second. All in favor, raise your hand.
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimous. All right. On to number 11, possession and release of pen-reared game birds rule amendments.
Excellent. So just a brief summary of those changes is that instead of having Mycoplasma, Gallisepticum, and Synovae mandatory for the growers to carry out, we will select some random sampling throughout the state, and at our own cost, we will go ahead and test those facilities just to get a gauge of prevalence. Also, just making sure that people understand the difference between some licensure with UDAF and with Division of Wildlife. If people hold 1,000 game birds or eggs for more than 60 days, they need a commercial license through UDAF. And then just other further clarifications, things like game stores, feed stores not being able to sell game birds for the concern of disease and just unregulated possession, things like that.
All right. Does that include wild turkey chicks or
yes.
of that? So I said wild, but I don't know how they. Yeah.
If they're actually Rio Grande, Merriam's, any of the wild birds that are defined in our game bird rule, then those should not be sold at feed stores. And there are poultry dealers that can be licensed through UDAF that definitely sell all those species to people that would like to purchase them. But that way it's more regulated. We can have a better understanding of what kind of disease testing and things like that entails.
Okay. All right, John, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Since the testing for Mycoplasma was obviously at one time deemed important enough to make it mandatory, what's the reasoning for no longer making it mandatory?
That's a great question. There just wasn't enough support from the constituents and from their sister agency just to be able to follow through with that mandate.
But the disease is still present in these birds at times. So now it's purely going to be a hit or miss if it's not mandatory. Is that correct?
It could be present, which is why we are conducting some of our own testing to gauge prevalence of different facilities and what they're seeing in their birds. But also, we made a few other changes to the rule that do help with the release of any birds out into the wild that do have disease, making sure people understand that is a criminal offense. And also that if there's clinical signs shown in a quarter or more of their flock, then they have to report it. Also, large mortality events, they have to report as well. So that should help regulate that to some extent, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, I've got a question. Heather, I'm just totally naive to game birds and releasing those into the wild and how many people do this and just kind of what it looks like across Utah. Can you kind of paint a broad picture for us of what raising game birds looks like and this whole issue?
So fun. So we've got between, I think, 60 or 70 CHAs throughout the state, and commercial hunting areas, essentially, probably most people are familiar with. You go pay a fee and then have a pheasant or a chuck or other wild game hunt on their property. And what the issue is some of these facilities are smaller and operate at a smaller capacity. And with those, they're mostly just selling to CHAs birds that they're raising. So now we are requiring documentation for the seller to provide disease test results and for the buyer to keep those results so that we were making sure to track that better. But with our bigger farms, they already, people that are NPIP certified and have commercial licenses, a lot of that is already captured, but for the smaller entities, it may not be captured as well. So keeping those disease records will help us gauge that a little bit more. But that's what it basically entails, either hunting on a CHA or smaller growers selling to CHAs. Yep.
Good questions and good feedback there. Any other questions? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, go to Jason for public input.
There were no comments on this agenda item.
That's how good the presentation was.
I like your twist on that.
So I was just impressed that you didn't have the DWR RAC come up and answer all those technical questions. She should buy you a donut or something. John Bear, you have a comment.
John Bear with SFW. Just wanted to say we support this as presented and tell Heather she's done a good job. I know she manages a lot of things over Upland Game. We raise a lot of birds for a lot of events and a lot of things that go on WMAs and youth hunts and whatnot. So this is pretty near and dear to our heart, this kind of thing. And the division's done a great job, and Heather's done a great job. And we appreciate their cooperation and allowing us to be part of this. And so we support it as presented. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
And thank you to SFW for their cooperation with these as well. It's a lot of work.
Good. Okay, bring it back to the RAC for discussion.
I'll go for it. I'll make a motion to approve the presentation as presented.
I will second the motion.
Okay, motion to pass as presented. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Passes unanimous. Okay. Now, in the past, we've kind of brought this back. I mean, the public we have to elect a RAC chair. But before that, I would just like to ask Josh if there's anything he'd like to say as an outgoing member.
Probably muster something. My grandfather always said, you have to be ready to pray, preach, or die. So I guess this is the preaching part. Actually, Mike, you've said it best many times in the past. Serving on this committee or on this RAC or any of the committees is a privilege, and I've counted it as such. I've tried to take my role very serious, and it's been a privilege for sure. I've served 2 terms, 8 years, and in that time I've learned so much about wildlife and Utah and the landscape, and I'm grateful for that because it's what we're all passionate about. And I don't know how I would have come to that knowledge without having been through this process. I've made some great friendships both in the division and ancillary relationships throughout, and it's just been a real joy to interface with the public, and I've tried to do my best to represent sportsmen, of which many of us are, and I'm thank you all for your confidence in me. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I just want to say thanks also to the division for allowing us to participate in the management of our wildlife. And I appreciate the indulgence that many have had over the years of listening to me ask questions and talk about things. I think it's important when we're RAC members to vet these items and do it in this public forum, and appreciate that opportunity to do that for the last 8 years. So now we're going to move on to agenda item number 12, and that's the election of a RAC chair and a vice chair. Brock is not here. He can serve another 2 years as chair. And not saying that to sway anybody. He is in Spain, so if you do decide to vote him in, then and he declines that, then those duties would probably fall to the vice chair, and there'd be a vice chair election, or that's just an option. Some people really want to be chair, and some people don't, and so that's.
I'll nominate Brock for chair. I'll second it. All right, can we do a second motion in a second?
Well, I think we just
Ready to vote.
we'll just vote, and we'll take multiple nominations. If anybody else would like to nominate another member of the RAC to be chair, we can do that now. And I promise you that Brock will not be offended if somebody nominates somebody else.
Mike, I think in the past we've done a name on a paper, so it was anonymous.
Well, what we do is we nominate, and if we have multiples, then we do a paper. But
Okay.
if we only get one nomination for chair, then that's who it'll be.
Copy.
And we will vote, and it is okay to vote against also, even if there is only one nomination. I don't know what happens if that vote is all negative, but I'm entered on the phone.
Mike, I would nominate Braden, and it's not to upset you, Braden, or to put in pressure, but I think that having somebody that is vocal enough to express and to kind of get the conversation started is important. And I think Brock does that. I think Braden does that. I think there's a few others that aren't here that we could nominate also that do that as well. But I would nominate Braden as well.
Okay, do you accept that nomination?
Sure. Or I can
Sure. Okay. So
Can I decline and serve as vice chair?
you could if you wanted to.
Okay.
Do I need to nominate him as vice chair? Or is that something that's selected later on?
Well, he has the opportunity to decline your nomination, and then he kind of nominated himself
Oh,
as
that
vice
works too,
chair,
then.
which
Second-
I
second
great. Yeah. It'd be really nice if we had a former wildlife board person come up and handle this for us, but we won't make it. Okay.
So yeah, it looks like we have one nomination, so we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor, raise your hands.
Brock.
Wait, we have 2 nominations.
Well, he declined the
I
nomination.
said I would
for-
serve as vice chair if the RAC wants to go that direction. If not, maybe I shouldn't.
So you did decline the chair nomination.
Is that terrible? So I think Brock's been doing a good job, and I think I'd gladly serve with Brock as a vice chair if the RAC's comfortable there and just continue to support Brock. And then as long as he doesn't travel as much, I told Mike, I said, I hope, is Brock travel this often? You know, so that's where I'm at. If the RAC would go with that route, I would be comfortable.
I will ask if there's another nomination for vice chair. Seeing none, turn it over to Jason for our official vote. Because I get a vote in this.
Okay, so we have one nomination for chair. We'll vote on that first. All in favor of Brock for chair? Opposed? Looks like it's unanimous. Okay, the second vote will be for vice chair. We have one nomination, Braden. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimous.
All right. I'll take one last motion to adjourn. Anybody? One last motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Okay. Okay, we're adjourned.